and also as the greater body of Christ. We were a member of the state and thereby a member of our national government. And the federal nature of the Constitution was, this was establishing. And it also that we were consolidated or confederated. Well, actually, we were neither. We were both. We were consolidated in that we gave certain powers to our national government to consolidate us, but we reserved other powers to the states and to the people, respectively, is what the 10th Amendment says. So we were confederated in that the Union of States had those certain powers. So we were neither confederated and consolidated, and both confederated and consolidated. It's just kind of a combination between the two. So that's why it's a question mark there. The third clause has to establish justice. And that was the principle of Christian individuality, equality. We were equal before the law, not equal in goods or possessions. We just had the right to justice, that if somebody who had no money and somebody who was very wealthy committed a crime, they would have equal access to justice. Now today we have the best justice that money can buy, no justice whatsoever. Absolutely. Some of them. Yep. So you can only have justice if you have individuals who are equal before the law. Fourth clause is to ensure domestic tranquility. And this is the principle of biblical sovereignty, jurisdiction. It goes back to the sphere of sovereignty. The government needs to stay within its jurisdiction. Ensure means to keep people in their jurisdiction. And juris means authority. Government only has the sovereignty where power is given in the Constitution. That goes back to what I talked about in the express powers. And jurisdiction means to have authority or power, authorized power. People of states have significantly more authority than the central government. Again, we are a bottom-up society. The expectations of our founders is that we, the people, would govern ourselves through Christian self-government, and that we would give limited powers to, especially the national government, and then a few more powers to the state, and a few more powers to the counties, and then townships. We as a people should care more about who's being elected as our county executive, because they supposedly have more impact on our lives than the national government. The national government should not even be messing with domestic policy. It's not authorized in our Constitution. Provide for a common defense, in the fifth clause, is a principle of Christian character or liberty. Domestic and foreign defense, that they were to provide for domestic and foreign defense for us. And that private security is better than collective security or public security. That each one of us has a right to self-defense, and that is the government will never be able to protect us in that regard, and then we must retain that right for self-defense. Liberty is a solution to most problems in our society. In other words, we should not be looking to the national government to solve our problems. We should be looking to ourselves. We should be looking at the community and saying, what can we do to solve this problem that we have? When we abdicate our responsibilities to the national government, we have tyranny. They'll come down and tell us how to live our lives. Promote the general welfare, which is the biblical principle of stewardship, responsibility. Welfare is the primary responsibility of the individual, just like I showed that sphere sovereignty chart that was on that far side. It does not belong to the government. Health, education, financial resources, these are some of the areas that we should have personal responsibility in. Promote meant to our founding fathers not to interfere, but it now means to provide. And general meant the common good, but now it means special. So in other words, we have special welfare instead of general welfare, that we give money to individuals and to groups and to states. It's unauthorized in our Constitution. Even disaster relief. Well, show me where it's authorized to go and redistribute taxpayer dollars to some individuals down in a disaster area. No, that's our responsibility as individuals to provide for those people in need. We should be fulfilling that role. And if we don't fulfill that role, that's when government has stepped in and done it for us, and it's not good. So we have ourselves to blame for that. Maybe not everybody here, but it's happened over time, especially at the turn of the last century. Seventh clause, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, which is the biblical principle of sowing and reaping posterity to our children. It's to protect paternal rights of education. The government does not own our children. They are not responsible for educating their children. They should not be telling us what we should educate our children on. That is a parental perspective. You own your children. You should be responsible for their education. This is what I want them to be educated on, and this is where I want them to be educated, whether it's in your home or somewhere else or or not at all. It's your responsibility, your choice. It's dependent on the character of the people. If God judges us as a culture for the way we act, if we are not upholding His laws and His character, then there will be a judgment upon us. The Bible authorizes the government to educate and train the military alone, and that's all. That's the further down they can go. An education of one generation becomes the government of the next. From Abraham Lincoln. If you go back and look at the two Supreme cases of 62 and 63, the Ingle versus Whitehouse and the Avenue versus Shem cases, one said that you couldn't make prayer mandatory in school, and the other said you couldn't make biblical teaching mandatory in school. It didn't say that it outlawed it. All it said is that you couldn't make it mandatory. Well, since that time, we've extricated all those teachings out of the school system and implemented other curriculum that tends towards socialism, and there's no wonder that 40 years later that we have the government that we now have. How many powers did the people delegate to the Congress in the Constitution? Does anybody here know? Want to take a guess? 2? 20. And here they are. These are things that these are the things that Congress can do. They can collect taxes. And they can spend. The reason why, yes, they do that very well. But you got to understand, the reason why our founders put that in there, because if they only gave them the power to collect taxes and not the power to spend, they would not have the power to spend. That's what it's meant by the express powers document. They had to put that in there. Go ahead, you have a question?
You should have said, not spend more than what you collect the taxes.
Well, that's true.
See number 1.
Yeah, well, number 3 was borrow. They had the authorization to borrow, but they never intended to borrow more than you could pay off in a generation. Otherwise, it's a generational theft. You should not borrow money for people that have not been born yet, who have no representation, who couldn't vote and say, no, I don't want that spent for this. Yes, it did. To regulate commerce. Regulate, not control or take over. Their purpose in regulating commerce was to make sure that the marketplace stayed free, protect the weak against the strong. The rule of law was established in the marketplace, and that's all. Today they've abused that. The commerce clause is one of the biggest areas in which they've abused. Established rules for citizenship. Their intention was that they would attract citizens here that would come covenant with us, who had the same ideas as we did, who understood the Bible as we did, and would come and uphold our Christian-based laws. Established bankruptcy laws. Their intention in the bankruptcy laws was that they wanted to protect the person who was not able to meet his obligations, so that he could eventually meet his obligations and pay off all of his creditors. It was never to wipe out debt, because if you're somebody who's owed money, what right does the government come in and say, oh no, you don't need to pay anything? There's no right at all. To coin and regulate the value of money. And notice that they use the word coin. They didn't say print, they said coin. And they meant that gold and silver. And then you go to the next, in section 10 of this article, it talks about that the states will accept nothing but silver or gold as the medium of exchange. Standardized weights and measures. Could you imagine if 1 year a yard is this long, and another year is longer, and each year it changes? The kind of havoc that would be in our society if they did that. Well, that's what's going on with our laws right now. Because when we were founded in common law and have now shifted to case law, we don't know what the law is going to be next year. The things that are illegal now could be legal next year. At least before, when we were under common law, we had a stability of laws. So that's why standardization of weights and measures, aside from the law, which is a tangent, is so important. It keeps society stable. Punish counterfeiters, which is obvious. To establish post office and post roads. Notice the word establish. It didn't say run, control, or do. It just established. And what the intention was that they would say, this is where the post office goes, and this is where the post road should be. And that private citizens would run those things, not the national government. That's right. You have to understand that the most inefficient business that stays in business is still far more efficient than the most efficient government. So yeah, they should not be running anything. Pass copyright and patent laws. This goes back to protection of intellectual property. Establish inferior courts. In other words, we have a superior court and then we have inferior courts within the appellate system, so that people can try cases at lower level, and eventually, if they need to, elevate it to the highest. That way our court system wouldn't be clogged up unnecessarily. Define and punish crimes on the high seas according to the law of nations. This is the only place in the Constitution where you'll find, and I didn't put it up here, the law of nations mentioned. The law of nations was the foreign policy upon which our founders thought we would maintain throughout our existence. And it's based on the laws of God, and it's the basic principles that we do unto other nations as we have them do unto us. Declare war. War meant any aggressive action against a foreign power. It doesn't matter if you call it police action or whatever. It's a war, and it needs to be declared by Congress. They're the only ones who have that authority. Raise and finance armed forces. I put the asterisk here because if you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it talks about armies have to be financed every 2 years. They have to be reapproved. And the reason for that is because a Navy wasn't going to come in and put martial law down in the country and restrict our liberties. But a standing army could. So they did not want a big standing army. They said that we could establish a Navy and maintain that Navy in perpetuity. But a standing army, no, could not. It had to be reapproved by Congress every 2 years. And by extension, an Air Force also falls into the Navy category because an Air Force isn't going to restrict our liberties either. They're defensive in nature. They're going to keep us safe from foreign powers. Establish rules for the armed forces. That's why the Uniform Code of Military Justice is established by Congress. And call it state militia. The militia back then was anybody that was 18 or 45 years old, any male, and that was able-bodied. And notice it says call up. It didn't say demand that you come. That's because our national government has no authority to draft anybody. We fight at our own, we're our own people, and we can decide, well, is this a cause worth dying for? And yes it is, I'll go fight for it. Administer the seat of government, and this goes to the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia is 100 square miles that was granted to our national government to be the seat of government, and they have jurisdiction over the whole thing. There is no hierarchy, there's no state level or mayor or whatever, at least it wasn't back then. Administer federal property, and again, it starts there, the caveat, because when you read it, it talks about that the federal property they had was the arsenals and fortifications and things of that nature. They were not to own land or other buildings or whatever for any other purpose, so it was very specific what they were supposed to own. I don't know if you know it or not, but 85% of the land in Alaska is owned by our national government. West of the Mississippi, they own a significant portion of land, and it was not to be that. They're supposed to hold it for the people or the states, so that they open it up for the people to buy, and whatever the people don't buy, the states can buy off, and they're supposed to manage it. It's not supposed to be administered by the national government. They're not supposed to go to national parks or any other such property. And pass laws to implement the above. So when you hear people say, well, we're allowed to pass all necessary laws. Yes, you're allowed to pass all necessary laws to implement the preceding 19 powers, not to pass any law on anything you want to or that you can dream up. And so that's abused a lot today. How many powers do the people give to the President in the Constitution? Anybody want to take a guess? Was it more than what was granted to Congress or less?
Less.
That's right, less. Only 8. These are things the President can do. He can require opinions from his cabinet in writing. He can grant reprieves and pardons. And the intention behind this was that if there was a case that was contentious in America, that it would be better for national healing that this person be pardoned. He had the ability to do so. It was never intended to curry political favor. He can make treaties with the consent of the Senate. And this shows you that the Senate is our foreign policy wing of our national government. They are elected for 6 years, and they provide the continuity that's needed to look at foreign policy issues. And plus, they were originally appointed by the state legislatures and didn't have the rational exuberance of the popular vote to do something that was like really popular at the time, but wasn't wise. You can nominate people, and then with the consent of the Senate, appoint the ambassadors, other public ministers and councils, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States. So he can only nominate, he cannot appoint them without the consent of the Senate. He can fill vacancies that happen during recess in the Senate. So if the Senate leaves and hasn't filled one vacancy the President needs, he can fill that position temporarily until the end of the next session. And you've seen that both Bush and Obama have done that just recently. convene both houses or either of them. So in other words,